The sun hung low over the arid plains, painting the horizon in hues of amber and crimson, as the old cowboy, Samuel Creed, stood on the porch of his weathered ranch house. His hands, calloused from decades of roping cattle and mending fences, trembled slightly as he clutched a $1 bill, its edges frayed like his own fading life. Samuel's eyes, sharp despite his failing body, scanned the vast expanse of his land, hundreds of acres of rugged beauty, where mesquite trees stood like silent sentinels and the wind carried whispers of forgotten stories. He was dying, the doctor had said so, and with no heirs to claim his legacy, Samuel had made a decision that would ripple through time. The Apache people, whose ancestors once roamed these lands freely, had been in his thoughts for years. Their history was etched into the rocks and rivers of this place, a history of resilience and loss. Samuel had heard tales of their sacred connection to the land, stories passed down through generations, and he felt a deep, unspoken guilt for the fences he'd built on soil that wasn't truly his. So, at sunrise, he had signed the deed, selling his ranch to the Apache tribe for $1, a symbolic gesture, a reckoning with the past. As the first rays of light broke over the hills, 77 Apache warriors, men and women clad in a blend of traditional and modern attire, arrived on horseback, their silhouettes stark against the dawn. They weren't here to conquer but to reclaim, their presence a quiet testament to their enduring bond with the earth. Samuel watched them dismount, their movements graceful, deliberate, as they spread across the land, touching the soil, whispering prayers. He felt a weight lift from his chest, as if the land itself exhaled in relief. The $1 bill, now tucked into his pocket, seemed heavier than gold, a token of redemption for a man who'd spent his life taking more than he gave. The warrior's leader, a woman named Tala, approached him, her eyes holding a wisdom that made Samuel feel small yet seen. She thanked him, not with words of grandeur, but with a simple nod, her hand resting briefly on his shoulder. The land was theirs again, and Samuel knew, as his heart faltered, that he'd done right by it at last. Too, the ranch had been Samuel's world for over 50 years, a place where he'd carved out a life from the stubborn earth, wrestling with droughts, stampedes, and the loneliness that clung to him like dust. He'd bought the land cheap in his youth, back when the government parceled out territories with little regard for who'd called them home before. The Apache had been pushed to reservations, their stories buried under the weight of progress, but Samuel had found traces of them everywhere: arrowheads in the creek, petroglyphs on the cliffs, and old trails worn into the earth. As a young man, he'd ignored those signs, too focused on building his empire of cattle and barbed wire. But age and illness had a way of sharpening the conscience, and the more he learned about the Apache's history, the more he saw his ranch as a stolen thing, a debt unpaid. The decision to sell for $1 wasn't impulsive. It was born from sleepless nights, from conversations with an old Apache elder who'd once worked his land, teaching him about the spirits that lingered in the canyons. Samuel had no children, no one to inherit the ranch, and the thought of it falling to some faceless corporation gnawed at him. When he contacted the tribe, offering the land back, they were wary at first. Too many promises had been broken before. But Tala, the leader, saw truth in his eyes, and after months of talks, they agreed. The $1 was her idea, a symbol of a value beyond money, a bridge between their worlds. As the 77 warriors filled the land that morning, Samuel watched them move with purpose, some carrying sage to burn, others planting stakes to mark sacred sites. They didn't speak much, but their presence was a language of its own, one of gratitude and reclamation. Samuel leaned against a post, his breath shallow, feeling the weight of his years. He thought of his father, a hard man who'd taught him to take what he could from the world, and wondered what he'd think of this act. The warriors' voices rose in a soft chant, carried by the wind, and Samuel felt a strange peace, as if the land was forgiving him. 2, 3. Tala stood at the edge of the ranch, her boots sinking slightly into the soft earth where a spring bubbled up, hidden among the sagebrush. She was in her 40s, her face lined with the strength of someone who'd carried her people's stories through a world that often tried to erase them. The 77 warriors who followed her weren't an army but a community: elders, mothers, young men, and women, each chosen for their connection to the land's history. They had come to honor Samuel's gesture, to walk the soil their ancestors knew, to breathe life back into a place that had been silenced. Tala remembered her grandmother's tales of this land, of ceremonies held under starlit skies, of battles fought and lost when settlers came with guns and deeds. The ranch was more than dirt and grass, it was a piece of their soul, a fragment of their story stolen long ago. Samuel's offer had stunned her. Land returned was a rare thing, almost a myth. She'd met him months ago, expecting a rancher's arrogance, but found instead a man humbled by time, his eyes clouded with sickness but clear with intent. The dollar was her insistence, a way to make the exchange sacred, to acknowledge the past without bitterness. As the warriors spread out, some knelt to pray, others traced the outlines of old paths, their hands brushing the earth like a long-lost friend. Tala watched Samuel from a distance, his frail frame silhouetted against the rising sun, and felt a mix of gratitude and sorrow. He was giving them back a piece of their heart, but she knew he was paying with his final days. The warrior's presence was a promise to the land, a vow to heal it, to plant crops and hold ceremonies, to let the spirits of their ancestors know they hadn't been forgotten. A young warrior, barely 20, approached Tala with a handful of soil, his eyes bright with emotion. She nodded, and he scattered it back to the ground, a gesture of renewal. The air hummed with possibility, and Tala felt the weight of her responsibility to her people, to the land, and even to Samuel, whose sacrifice was a bridge to a future they could all share. For the morning unfolded slowly, the sun climbing higher, casting long shadows across the ranch as the Apache warriors worked in quiet harmony. Some gathered stones to build a small altar, others walked the perimeter, marking boundaries not with fences but with prayers and offerings of tobacco. Samuel sat on a creaking chair, his breath ragged, watching the scene unfold like a dream he didn't deserve to witness. He'd spent years alone here, the silence broken only by the lowing of cattle or the howl of coyotes at night. Now, the land was alive with voices, with movement, with purpose. He thought of the stories he'd heard from the old Apache elder, tales of warriors who fought not just for survival but for the right to exist as they were, rooted to this earth. Samuel had always seen himself as a man of the land, but now he understood the difference between owning it and belonging to it. The warriors belonged, their every step a conversation with the soil, the sky, the spirits he could never see. Tala had explained it to him once, over coffee in his cluttered kitchen, her voice steady as she spoke of the Apaches' belief that the land wasn't property but a living thing, a mother who sustained them. Samuel had nodded, not fully understanding then, but now, watching the 77 warriors, he felt it in his bones. A young girl, no older than 10, ran past him, her laughter bright as she chased a butterfly, and Samuel's heart ached with a mix of joy and regret. He wished he'd learned sooner, wished he'd listened when the elder spoke of the sacred springs and the stories carved in stone. The dollar in his pocket felt like a talisman now, a reminder that some debts could be paid, even if late. The warriors didn't look at him with anger, as he'd feared they might, but with a quiet respect that made him feel both honored and unworthy. As the sun reached its peak, Tala called the group together, and they formed a circle near the spring, their voices rising in a song that seemed to pull the past into the present. Samuel closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him, feeling the land breathe again. 5. By midday, the ranch was transformed, not by fences or buildings, but by the presence of the Apache warriors, who moved with a reverence that made the land feel sacred again. They planted seeds in a small plot near the creek, a symbolic act to mark the beginning of their stewardship. Samuel watched from his porch, his strength waning, but his mind sharp, taking in every detail of the way the warriors worked together, their hands quick and sure, their faces lit with purpose. He thought of the years he'd spent fighting the land, forcing it to yield to his will, and saw now how wrong he'd been. The Apache didn't fight the earth, they danced with it, their actions a partnership rather than a conquest. Tala had told him about the ceremonies they'd hold here, the songs and dances that would call back the spirits of their ancestors. Samuel wished he could live to see it, to hear the drums echo through the canyons, but he knew his time was short. The doctor had given him weeks, maybe days, and every breath was a struggle now. Yet, sitting here, watching the warriors. He felt a peace he hadn't known in years. The dollar deal wasn't about money, it was about righting a wrong, about giving back what he could. He remembered the day he'd signed the deed, Tala's steady gaze across the table, her signature beside his, the single dollar passing between them like a sacred vow. The warrior's presence was a fulfillment of that vow, their footsteps a reclamation of history. A young man, his face painted with red ochre, approached Samuel with a small woven basket, a gift of thanks, he said, for returning the land. Inside was a stone, smooth and warm from the sun, carved with a faint spiral. Samuel held it, his fingers tracing the lines, and felt a connection to something larger than himself. The warriors' voices rose again, a chant that seemed to vibrate through the earth, and Samuel wondered if the land itself was singing, welcoming its people home. 6. As the afternoon sun dipped toward the horizon, the warriors gathered near the ranch house, their work pausing as they prepared a small fire. The smoke curled upward, carrying the scent of sage and cedar, a cleansing ritual that Tala explained would purify the land and honor its return. Samuel watched from his chair, too weak to stand now, but his eyes followed every movement, drinking in the scene. The 77 warriors stood in a loose circle, their faces turned toward the fire, their voices low and rhythmic. Tala led the ceremony, her words in Apache, a language Samuel didn't understand but felt in his soul. He thought of the years he'd spent alone, the nights when the silence of the ranch was a weight he couldn't shake. Now, that silence was gone, replaced by the hum of life, the pulse of a people reclaiming their place. He remembered the stories Tala had shared, of Apache warriors who'd fought to protect this land, of families torn apart by treaties and greed. Samuel had never fought in a war, but he'd waged his own battle against drought, against debt, against the loneliness that came with a life tied to the land. Selling the ranch for $1 wasn't just about giving it back, it was about letting go of his own pride, his need to control. The warrior's presence was a reminder that the land didn't belong to him, never had. It belonged to those who knew its stories, who carried its spirit in their blood. A young woman, her hair braided with beads, approached Samuel with a cup of water from the spring, offering it with a smile. He drank, the coolness soothing his parched throat, and thanked her with a nod. The fire crackled, its light dancing on the faces of the warriors, and Samuel felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the flames. He was part of something now, not as an owner, but as a witness, a man who'd made a choice to heal rather than harm. 7. The sky burned red as the evening settled over the ranch, the warriors' shadows stretching long across the land they now called home again. Samuel's breath came slower now, each inhale a labor, but he refused to leave the porch, wanting to hold on to this moment as long as he could. The Apache had begun to set up camp, their tents and bedrolls scattered across the field, a temporary village that felt timeless. Tala sat with Samuel for a while, her presence steady, grounding. She spoke of the future, of how the tribe would use the land not for profit, but for healing, for teaching their children the old ways, for growing food and holding ceremonies. Samuel listened, his heart full, imagining the ranch alive with laughter, with songs, with the life he'd never been able to give it. He thought of the dollar in his pocket, the deed signed at sunrise, and felt no regret, only a quiet pride that he'd done something right. The warriors moved with purpose, some tending the fire, others preparing food, their voices a soft hum that blended with the evening breeze. Samuel's eyes grew heavy, but he forced them open, wanting to see it all in the land, the people, the future unfolding before him. Tala noticed his struggle and placed a hand on his, her touch warm and firm. She didn't speak, but her eyes said enough, a thank you that went beyond words. Samuel thought of his life, the mistakes he'd made, the fences he'd built, and felt a forgiveness he hadn't expected. The warriors' chants rose again, a melody that seemed to weave the past and present together, and Samuel let himself sink into it, his body tired but his spirit light. The land was alive again, and he was part of its story, not as a conqueror, but as a man who'd given it back. 8. Night fell, and the stars emerged, a vast canopy over the ranch that seemed to pulse with life. The warriors' fire glowed, its light a beacon in the darkness, and their voices carried on, singing songs that had been sung for centuries. Samuel was barely conscious now, his body slipping away, but his mind clung to the scene before him of the 77 warriors, their silhouettes moving against the firelight, their presence a promise kept. Tala stayed near, her voice soft as she spoke of the land's future, of the children who would run here, the elders who would teach, the spirits who would rest easy knowing their people had returned. Samuel's hand rested on the carved stone in his lap, its weight grounding him, connecting him to the earth one last time. He thought of the dollar, the deed, the sunrise that had changed everything, and felt no fear, only peace. The warrior's song grew louder, a celebration of homecoming, and Samuel's breath slowed, his eyes closing as the music carried him. The land was theirs again, the Apaches, and in giving it back, Samuel had found his own redemption. The stars watched over the ranch, the fire burned bright, and the 77 warriors stood as guardians of a new dawn, their voices echoing into the night, a testament to a land reclaimed, a debt repaid, a story made whole.